Okay, I'm Tim Nelson. I'm a safety consultant, and I'm out of the Salem field office here. I've been with the agency for 18, 19 years now. I did 13 years of enforcement work before I moved it into the consultation side. So if you have any questions during our talk here about enforcement as well, I can answer your question. And then Garnet Cook here, she's actually on the enforcement side, but she's the health side. Cover that.
Sure. I've been with Oregon OSHA almost 23 years. I'm the pesticide coordinator, and so pesticides throughout any industry is my background. And hopefully today when I'm out on this type of outing, I am enforcement free. So anytime you have a question regarding pesticides, I'm not going to harbor it or hold it against you. It's a question, or questions are welcomed.
Okay. So basically the way I'm going to do this has anybody been through a consultation before here? Okay. And that's the way I'm going to treat this is basically if I came out to your location, what we would look for and what we would do. Again, I'm the safety side, so I'll cover that, and then Garnet will cover the pesticides and the health section. I'm going to have some handouts when I'm done. First off, usually when we come out to do a consultation, of course, is at your request. We come out, do whatever you want. We want to do a full-blown comprehensive consultation. We'll do a walkthrough of your facility, looking at all your tools and equipment, and then also review the programs that you would be required to have. And I'm just going to go through the programs real quick. At least the safety ones. The first one would be safety committee or safety meetings. And I've got our booklet for ag employers and what's required. So for most ag employers that are small employers, it's just a safety meeting once a month. And you keep documentation on that. So if you're a larger employer with 11 or more full-time employees, then it jumps into the safety committee. And that's where you have a chairperson, written minutes every month, quarterly walkthroughs, and some specific training for your safety committee members on hazard ID and accident investigation. So again, we're just doing the talk today. If you guys want to have a full consultation, I'm going to leave my card. You can email me or you can call in and request a consultation where we come out to your location and do a consultation. Just so you know, if you request one today, you probably won't see one of us we're backlogged 2 months. We've got some people off because of injury, and there's only 2 of us that are covering like 7 counties. So, so back to the programs. Safety meetings, HAZCOM program, I'll let Garnet cover. 2 in tractor training. Everybody have tractor operators or not? Okay. Make sure you do an annual tractor training. Again, I'm going to give you this brochure or this printout I have, and I'm also going to email you, Chris, this document right here, because then they can just forward it to everybody, and it has links that'll take you right to different training programs. So, so an annual tractor training for all employees. And then also forklifts. If you have employees that operate forklifts, it's an annual training as well. A couple other equipment training. We don't have any rules on ATVs, but I recommend that you do the same thing there. Because our rules are real generic. You shall train employees on every tool or piece of equipment they use. So I would just include it, do it at an annual basis. We've been having a lot of accidents with ATVs. I don't know if you've seen them in the news or anything like that. The last one I think was Jensen, the last one. We had a 17-year-old, it was a fatality with an ATV. Yeah. So that's it on equipment as far as tractors. Other safety training, would be having emergency procedures developed, and that's in case you do have an accident, what your employees are supposed to do. Should be just a short little blurb, call 911, notify whoever the supervisor, whatever you want your employees to do, and then have them trained on that.
Are there specifications on like the tractor training and the forklift training? I mean, what has to be included in those trainings?
No,
Who can conduct them?
anybody knowledgeable in the subject can conduct it. Most often, what I see is the employer actually does the training, because they're knowledgeable on, you know, how tractors roll over. What I recommend is that you just use the manual from the tractor. It'll have the safety training section of it. Use that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, like I said, I'm in hand, get this information out to you. This one, NASD online, and there's AgLink. There's a couple of real good online trainings that you can print out or do them online.
Is that, I mean, so is that different than other applications, like in a winery? I was under the assumption that in the winery, we have to have a certified trainer do that training.
Nope, not a certified trainer, just somebody knowledgeable in the subject. So what most employers do is they get somebody, and they send them usually to a training, and they come back and are your trainer for forklifts. But yeah, it's just so that they're knowledgeable. Like on forklifts, you know, stability triangle as far as how they turn over, and then the basics on operations on them. So one important thing is if you have like tractor training, you train them on every type of tractor you have that they're going to operate. Because I've seen it before where they're trained on a little Kubota, and then all of a sudden they're driving a larger tractor, and they operate differently. So you just make sure you train them on each piece of equipment that they operate. Yeah. And then as far as the documentation piece, it's the name of the trainer, the date, and the name of the training. And you can keep that in your safety meeting minutes, you can keep it in employee files, it's wherever you want to keep it. When enforcement comes out, if they ever come out to do an inspection, what they're going to do is, say they see somebody operating, they're going to ask to see the training documentations for that employee. Tractor training. With tractors, the most common thing I've seen over the years is lack of seatbelt use. So as an employer, you need to make sure your employees use them, and if they're not using them, use your disciplinary policy. Meaning first time verbal warning, second time written, or whatever your policy is, and just hold them accountable. And then the only time you're allowed to not use seatbelts is when your tractor is not equipped. There's actually, I think it's pre-1968 tractors that are grandfathered. They didn't come with the ROPS. So in that case, you don't want to be seatbelted in, because if you roll it and you don't have ROPS, you're going to get crushed that way. So. And then the only time with newer tractors you're allowed to not use it is in orchards, because of low limbs and stuff like that. But that doesn't pertain to most of you guys, because you're all vineyard operators. So. Other training programs on the safety side, and this one's kind of safety and health, is you need to do a PPE assessment, personal protective equipment assessment, and determine what your employees need to wear and when they need to wear it. Employees are going to use a chainsaw, you know, what they're supposed to wear. Eye protection and chaps. Hearing protection if the duration is substantial. I always say, yeah, just make them wear hearing protection all the time, but our requirements only kick in when you're exposed for a certain duration. It's an 8-hour time-weighted average, and Garnet will get into that. That's pretty much it on the safety programs that I can think of right now. I'll let Garnet go ahead and cover the health-related ones, and then
Okay. So we'll start with the easiest portion, and that's the worker protection standard, and it's the posting requirements. So if you've applied pesticides in the last 30 days, you need to have a central posting area. So this is just my reminder sign. You And so this is if you have your own employees as well as your contract employees. So at the central posting area, there are 3 elements. The pesticide safety poster, the emergency information that's at the bottom, and you can put this on a different, you know, a big square, a larger sign. But they have to have the name of the nearest hospital. And then your pesticide application information. So those are the 3 elements that make up the central posting area. One of the areas of confusion is the central posting signs and then the field posting signs. They're totally different. This field posting sign is required when the pesticide label requires you to post the field, and for most vineyards that's not the case. The other place you post this sign is if you've decided to make this your notification to your employees. You can either, as the employer, you have the option of posting the fields or orally notifying the workers. If the label does not say you must post the field, you get to make that choice. So if you're gonna notify everyone of when the fields have been sprayed, that's fine, or you can choose to post this sign. This sign cannot be used in lieu of a no trespassing sign to keep people from wandering in the fields. If you use this sign to let people know pesticides have been applied, you have to take it down before they go into the field. And it has to be taken down within 3 days after the end of the restricted entry interval. So those are the differences between the postings. Next up on one more thing on notification. So if you have to notify your employees when your fields are going to be sprayed so they can stay out of that area. And that requirement is in place if they're within a quarter mile of an area that's going to be treated. So even if they're working in a vineyard that is not being sprayed, if there's an application going on within a quarter mile, you have to notify them. If you have a contract employees working, the same thing applies. You have to notify them. If you're working with a contractor and the contractor is doing the harvest, they've got their own foreman out there taking care of everything, so you don't have to do that. You still have to provide the contractor with the pesticide application information, because yes.
Oh, okay. I'm
confuse
trying to
you?
figure out what kind of spray that we would be able to have in live that would require.
Any pesticide that you're applying, or any product that carries an EPA registration number, needs to be recorded.
Any spray but sulfur.
Even sulfur.
We
Sulfur is a
have to have that
pesticide.
sign up.
Which sign? This sign? You can notify your employees that you've sprayed, and you don't have to post this sign. Did I confuse you?
You can do either or, right?
You can do either or. If the label does not require you to use this sign, it will say in the ag use box.
Right.
So if you look at the ag use box and it doesn't say anything about posting the field, you can use this sign, or you can orally tell the people that you've sprayed.
Okay, let me ask it a different way.
Oh.
What spray would happen to be live certified that has required that we have to post it?
She's saying anything with an EPA reg number, that's all of them.
But everything? Anything
No,
that's
you-
registered under EPA?
No. There's very few products out there that require this sign to be posted.
That's why I'm asking.
Right,
I
but-
can't imagine.
Right, so, but I'm letting you know that this is why this sign is out there, because if it says in the ag use box to post the field, this is the sign you need to post. If it doesn't say anything in the ag use box, you can post this sign, or you can orally notify your people that you've sprayed. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm still baffled as to what spray in that live would have that would require that. If
But-
we're in live,
If you're in
then we
line,
don't, then if we're in live, I can't imagine any spray we'd be using.
right, but you would still have to notify your people that you've sprayed.
All this stuff has 24 hours re-entry, so you.
Well, re-entry, yes, but that
Right.
doesn't mean you have to post that.
No, but if you're gonna tell everybody that you've sprayed, you don't have to post the sign. But some people don't wanna tell everybody right now that they've sprayed. Because they're large enough, they've got people going in all different directions, and they don't have a morning meeting where everybody's gathered, that's why they use the sign. It's not that it's required in the box, but you have an option. Okay? So for a contractor, if you've got a contractor, they're not going to know what you've sprayed. So it's important that you give them the pesticide application information so that they can post that at their central posting area. Because if you've got a contractor, your contractor will have his own central notification area. If they're going from vineyard to vineyard, they might keep it with their crew leader, because they can do that. If they keep it with, from vineyard to vineyard, they can keep it in their own, with their crew leader. But it's important that any of their workers know where that information is at. So you've got to give that to your contractor. Does that make sense? Okay.
So if we give that information to our contractor that our central posting location is at the shop,
Okay.
and then they have new employees that continue to come through the labor contractor, it's not our responsibility to notify each employee that may be on their labor contractor crew, we just have to notify the contractor?
Yes.
Okay.
So if your shop is accessible and that's where everybody's gathering, and they're not reporting to some other location, and they know it's at the shop, you can let your contractor know, we're going to post the pesticide application information at the shop. This is our central posting area. Then it's up to the labor contractor to then say, get everybody together at a meeting and say, this is where the central posting area is. It's at this shop, at this site, it's here. And that's fine. Okay, the notification also takes place if you've got not just a contract crew with labor, but also if you have anybody scouting for you and you do any applications, you've got to communicate with them when you're doing your applications, so that they don't come out to do scouting in a field that's just been sprayed. We had some issues with that last year. So make sure, and this even includes if somebody's going to come on the property to do like telephone crews, or not telephone crews, but power line workers, it's important to let them know as well. So if you get the letter from them to say, we're gonna be on your land trimming trees, call that number back and say, okay, this is an ag operation, you need to have them contact me prior to their coming on site, because we do pesticide applications. So it's kind of widening widening your view so that you can protect any outside employers whose employees may come onto your site. They're not really good about doing that. So you need to take that step so it doesn't come back to you. You need to have the policy and procedures in place to protect your site. Yes?
This is just a tiny bit off topic, but not
Okay.
really. So when road workers spray the road outside of your property, they don't notify you before they do that.
Correct.
So why do they get a pass?
Because when the worker protection standard came into being, it did not include roadway right-of-way spraying.
Mhm.
So there are glitches in the system where that takes place. Now you can post a sign. There are a lot of signs that say, organic farm, do not spray, and then you are required for roadside maintenance. If it's the county, you can contact them and say, I want to be notified when those applications take place, and they can get you into the system.
They make you pay for it.
They do?
Yeah, to not spray your roadside. They make
Well,
you pay for it.
The reason they do that is because the weeds can damage the roads and then cause damage to increase cost. So what you you could probably get a pass on the fee if you then take care of the weeds on the road, no?
No, you're required to take care of the weeds, but then you also have to pay a permit fee to get them to not spray. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's not
Okay.
topic, but I just wanted to know why, like, so if I'm, working off the side of my property near the road, but they have just sprayed some pesticide, I'm subjected to it without knowing that they had done it. So it's an interesting law. Yeah.
There are some notification systems in place to, not all counties are the same as far as that goes.
Mhm.
But they, but you know, there is the fee thing is a different
Yeah.
glitch. But if they're exposing your workers, you as the employer are responsible. I'm on a board that's called the Pesticide Analytical and Response Center Board, and anytime there are claims of adverse health effects to pesticides, to humans, the environment, or animals, that gets into the system. And the park board is made up of representatives from OSHA, the Department of Agriculture, Fish and Wildlife, Health Division, DEQ, it's all the different state agencies. And we do have the state roads, ODOT, is also involved kind of on a ad hoc basis. And so I know that's where I knew about the road issue. Certain areas they have agreed to, the communities that don't like the roadside spraying, they will agree to maintain the roads with certain restrictions by bridges and, sharp turns and things like that. But they are requiring the citizenry to step up in lieu of that. So there is a notification system on the state level. For the counties, you've experienced that.
Yeah.
But you need to know who to call. For example, if your workers are affected, you need to be able to call the county and say, okay, what were they spraying, and then contact Park. Because when it's in the system that someone has been affected, then we can tab that, we can take legislative action, that type of thing. Okay, so that covers notification and posting. The other aspect is, next on the line that we look at is decontamination. There's two different types of decontamination. For workers, they need to be provided with bathrooms. That's not really part of the decontamination, but that is something they need. So with the bathrooms, if they have soap, water, and paper towels, you meet the requirements for the worker protection standard for decontamination. It has to be within a 5-minute walk or a quarter mile. Hand sanitizer is not accepted. Soap and water, if that is not present, that's a $300 penalty. So that's very important that you make sure that you keep up with those. That's for the workers, people harvesting, people pruning, people not handling pesticides. That's the requirements for decontamination. Yes?
Yeah, in my understanding, that needs to be potable water.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to be clear, because some
Yep.
vineyards, you actually have to haul in potable water. They don't necessarily have potable water on site, so
Yeah.
it makes it challenging sometimes, but.
Yes.
Exactly, like if you're pulling the water from a well, you need to make sure that well has been tested.
And reservoir water is obviously not going to be okay.
Yeah.
For people doing pesticide applications, at the pesticide mixing site, they have to have soap, water, paper towels, and a change of coveralls. If they're applying a product that has the signal word danger or danger poison, you have to have a 15-minute emergency eye wash. And so I brought some fact sheets for the emergency eye wash. So one of the products that does cause irreversible eye damage that vineyards are using is the lime sulfur. So be sure to look on the signal words. So if it says danger, danger poison, that means it's corrosive and it will cause irreversible eye damage. And that is also a serious violation and would have a start at $300. So that's
And one thing I saw quite often back when I did enforcement work is employers providing safety glasses for mixing that chemical. Well, safety glasses are not acceptable because it's going to call for a tight fitting goggle.
The goggles.
So it's just a common thing I used to see when I did enforcement work. So
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to the PPE. The change of coveralls can be either a Tyvek coverall or just make sure the worker brings a change of clothing to have on site. In the event that they receive a splash, a hose breaks or anything, and they get contamination on them, it's vital that they be able to take their clothes off, decontaminate, and have clean clothes to put on. Because we've had cases people don't want to run around naked, and so they have, they put their contaminated clothing back on, and it, you know, it makes null and void their decontamination efforts. So that's very important to do that. So for training for pesticides, we have two different types of training. We have training for the workers, people that do not handle chemicals, and we have training for those that do. For all parties, we have the requirement to pass out the safe practices when working around hazardous agricultural chemicals. All ag employees need to receive a copy of this. And they're free, and they're available through our, I brought some copies here so everybody can at least get one, but they are free and are available from our central office. The other element so as far as for HAZCOM, we have two different types of training for the two different types of workers. We have hazard communication training, and we have worker protection standard training. In Oregon, the worker protection standard training was preceded by hazard communication, and it's a little bit more, but not, for workers it improved, for handlers not so much. So for hazard communication training for workers, it's the safe practices brochure, and they need to know who they can go to for information on the chemicals that have been sprayed. So if we were doing a field sanitation inspection, we would go and talk to the workers, and we would say, do you know what's been sprayed? And they should say, well, we go to the central posting. Who would you find, or who would you go to find out more information on the chemicals? And they would say, we'd go to the supervisor. Then the person doing the inspection would go to the supervisor and say, where are the MSDSs for these chemicals? And they would say, right here in this book. That's the trail we would need to follow. For worker protection standard training for workers, they would also need to have the worker protection standard training once every 5 years. So this, and I brought copies of this DVD. This DVD comes in English, Spanish, Mixteco Alto, Mixteco Bajo. And so this is required once every 5 years, and you're good for the worker protection standard training. There's also, this is, if you would like to do the training in a more detailed fashion, this is a training, how to do the training for the worker portion of the worker protection standard. And this is an excellent book. But if you, there's no requirement saying which one you have to do. This works out really well, and this is pretty easy to do too. And this is a new video, and it's a really good one, out of Washington State. Then we've also got some heat stress books, in case the temperature warms up again. Oregon does not have rules right now for heat stress. Washington and California do, because of the numbers of fatalities that California's had. So we are trying to avoid having a fatality from heat stress here, so we do not have to follow suit. Yes?
What are examples of those rules in Washington or California?
In Washington and California, they have requirements for work rest breaks, for providing shade and providing training on heat stress. The worker protection standard addresses heat stress to a small extent, it's a little more involved.
Do they have to monitor heat and humidity, or do they not? As far as deciding when do they get to that threshold to start applying all these regulations?
In Washington, anyway, it does have a temperature. Once it reaches a certain temperature, they've got to follow these rules, yeah.
Okay.
Again, it's Washington, so I don't know the temperatures. I think it's in the low 90s.
Okay.
We have had individuals with heat stress in Oregon. We had one a couple years ago over in the Hermiston area where pesticide applicators were wearing Tyvek coveralls all day and they were not hydrating, and he was hospitalized in intensive care.
And like in Washington, that you have to actually have a heat stress plan program. It's a written program, and if you want to, you can just go onto their website, and it'd be a good thing to do it here in Oregon, even though we don't have the requirement. Doesn't mean it's not something you could do to.
So I mean, it's much better to be proactive than it's entirely preventable.
What I'll do is, again, like I said, I'm going to email this information. I'll go into the Washington website and include the heat stress information with this. So.
For handlers, the training is a little more complicated. You've got to anybody handling chemicals needs to have hazard communication training. And hazard communication training goes over the elements of what exactly is hazard communication. The employee right to know. So they need to know the information, the hazard on the chemicals that they're working with. They need to know what are the physical and health effects. What is this going to do if it gets splashed in my eyes, it gets on my skin? They need to know if they have any pre-existing medical conditions, that chemical is not going to make those conditions worse. That information is on the material safety data sheet, which is soon to be called the safety data sheet. So that information is contained on the MSDS. The MSDS gives the handler the information that they need to protect themselves. It tells them what to do in the event of a spill. Not all chemicals can be cleaned up the same way. The MSDS or SDS gives you specific guidelines. So pay close attention to that information. It tells them how to decontaminate themselves. The pesticide label, when you're working with the pesticide label or pesticides, the label is the law. So if the label tells you you need to wear this, you need to wear that. The MSDS will tell the manufacturing employees, the repackagers, what they need to wear, but the MSDS tells you what to wear in the event of a spill. So there's some differences there. So between the hazard communication requirements and the worker protection requirements, you get a much better protected worker. Because the worker protection standard is specific to pesticides, hazard communication covers everything. Welding covers diesel, gas, all the other chemicals that you're working with. The worker protection standard only applies to the chemicals. The hazard communication covers what to do in the event of an emergency. It covers what to do if you have outside contractors coming in and working. For example, you're hiring a contractor to come in, electrical contractor to come in to do work anywhere near the pesticide storage area. You need to let those employees know, or that employer know, that they'll be working around chemicals. This is how they need to protect themselves. That hazard communication requirement is the one that addresses that communication with outside parties. So in your case, with the roadside right-of-way, they're exposing your employees, but it's on a right-of-way. That might be an angle potentially there for you. The worker protection and the hazard communication training is required before the employee works with the chemicals. And Tim has got that on his list for programs, And there's a guideline, just a very easy guideline on training requirements, you know, each spelled out, each one is spelled out on what you need to, the elements of the hazard communication training. For the worker protection standard training portion, while hazard communication requires that training be effective, meaning that they need to be able to answer the questions, the worker protection standard training is required to be done every 5 years, and it has to cover specific elements. Those elements are outlined in the worker protection standard requirements. If someone has a pesticide applicator's license, they don't need to have worker protection standard training. They're exempted. Although the pesticide applicator, to get your license, they might not necessarily have questions talking about the worker protection standard training. So there's sometimes a glitch right there. If you are, those are the only ones that are exempted, or if you have a license, or if you're a family member or owner of the vineyard, then you don't need to have worker protection standard training. And so if you're working with a contractor, as far as the training requirements go, you can specify in your contract with the contractor that the contractor is responsible for providing WPS training to their employees, so that you don't have to do it. So make sure you can give the contractor a list saying, you need to make sure who's going to be providing field sanitation, who's going to be providing the training, so that you do not get people on your site that are missing something. So you can provide your contractor with a video, but say, all employees that come out to our vineyard, we want them to have the worker protection standard training. And so that makes it very easy. Yes?
A question on that, if you have people coming into your vineyard to pick the crop, you must notify them of all sprays that you put on, or what do you do that?
So if you're hiring for harvest and you have not sprayed in the last 30 days prior to harvest, plus the restricted entry interval, you do not have to let them know that, because pesticides have not, the worker protection standard does not apply. But if anything comes up and you have to spray in that 30-day window, then that kicks in the worker protection standard training. But where pruning goes, if you've had to have sprayed within that 30-day window of when people are going to be working in the vineyard, then the worker protection standard applies. So it's kind of easier to just imagine that it's going to apply, as opposed to, okay, it's the third Wednesday on the 4th month of the year. You know, it gets more, makes your mind spin more if you're trying to think of how you can get out of something, as to make sure everybody's watched that video, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest challenges with contractors, is they're constantly getting new workers, or, you know. I think
Yes,
that's probably the bigger challenges. Like, if it's just my crew, it's pretty easy to make sure they've
Yes.
all watched it. But when you start subcontracting, that's harder to keep track of, or, you know, figure out a system to make sure they've all gone through it. But
right,
maybe-
and so that's why I encourage people to make that and put that into their contract with their contractor, because their contractor has got to have the people sign up do all their paperwork. And so it's not, when it's really a nightmare, is if you have people that drive up to come and pick, and they just wander out in the field and start picking, and then want to get paid. Those are the folks that are really hard to try to get through training. If you don't have some kind of gate that they have to pass through to then get into the vineyard, or get into the orchard, or get into wherever they're going to work, if you don't have some method of keeping tabs of people, then it is going to be a nightmare. But so work with your contractors and say, okay, these are the things I want you to provide in a worker to me. I want them to be WPS ready to go. That they know they've had their video, so when they come on site, you can say, okay, this is our central posting area, it's located here. Decontamination, you're going to have your bathrooms within a quarter mile or a 5-minute walk. That's the rule. They will be there. They will have soap, water, and paper towels. If you're running out, this is who you go to say, look, we need more of this. This is how we operate here. And so when they know these are the things, then it goes smoother. So people need to know, okay, if something's not right, who do you go to? Then people don't call and complain to us. We've had complaints when people don't know what the requirement is as far as distance. They'll say the bathrooms are too far away, but no, the bathrooms are within the correct distance. But they don't know what that is, so if you tell them, this is what the rule, this is what the rule says, this is what, we're meeting the rule. We're doing this appropriately. So for personal protective equipment for pesticide applicators, we have got the pesticide use booklet here that contains the very handy guide for gloves. So on a pesticide label, it will give you follow category A, B, C, D as far as what type of gloves you need. Of course, they don't attach the corresponding chart, so you don't have any idea what that's talking about. Not all chemicals can be used, not any type of glove can be used with all chemicals. So this chart gives you what that guideline is. So we've got that here to go. It also covers if you're wearing protective coveralls, which ones are appropriate. So for vineyards and being in the live program, you're not going to be wearing most likely anything that requires you to wear a chemical resistant suit. And so, but this covers those. In addition, if you have products that require the use of a respirator, the respirator protection program kicks in. If you do not have any products that you're using that requires the use of a respirator, you don't have to do the respirator program. It goes by what the label says. So if the label requires it, this kicks in. The other aspect is if you have employees that want to wear respirators because the smell of the chemicals bother them. So and we call that voluntary use. So if you allow them to use a respirator, then part of the program kicks in. What that is they have to be medically evaluated to make sure that a respirator is not going to adversely impact their health, and they have to be trained on how to properly care for the respirator. So in this book, there are 2 CDs. The first CD covers it's a customizable written program, and it will just walk you through how to do the program. There are 2 on here, the required use and the voluntary use. So if you've got people that want to wear a respirator, that's voluntary. And so you do the partial program that's outlined on this first CD. The second CD is a training CD, and it covers how to properly take care of a respirator, what to expect with the respiratory protection program, fit testing, that type of thing. Okay, so it's all here and ready to go.
Is there a type of respirator when that kicks in? Do like just dust masks, nuisance masks qualify for that?
There are 4, okay, there's a picture on here. So for pesticides, you'll have a variety of different types. On a pesticide label, the dust mist respirator on the label is called, on the old labels are called TC21C. That went away in 1998. You will still see that on the labels now. There is no such thing. If you do a search for dust mist respirator, it brings up a particulate respirator. And this is one of those kind of a nightmarish thing. We do not cite people for using this type of dust mask, particulate mask, but the pesticide labels, if it says wear a TC21C, okay, let me kind of back up a second. When the Worker Protection Standard came out in 1994, it is a rule from the Environmental Protection Agency. Respirators are regulated by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and OSHA. As the EPA is marching through with their labels and their requirements for the Worker Protection Standard, NIOSH has decided that they are changing their respirator requirements. The EPA did not get on board with NIOSH at the time. So there's this big glitch in the system. And I think it was earlier this year, I was on this training conference call between NIOSH, the EPA was also involved, and it's talking about respirators in agriculture. This gentleman from NIOSH said, there's no such thing as a 21C. That went away in the middle of the 1990s. The gentleman from EPA said, the NIOSH group has brought that to our attention now, that this is no longer available, even though it's all on the labels. In 1998, the EPA sent out one time to the pesticide manufacturers the label changing requirements. So when it says a dust mist respirator now, what it means is a tight fitting mask with these pancake filters that are either N, P, R, or HEPA filters. And those are flat pancake filters, and that goes on over an organic vapor cartridge. Unless it's in a dust form, and then you can use a particulate mask. So it's very confusing. And I was so irritated on this call, I'm like, how is a grower supposed to know that? So it's maddening. So we are not citing if you're wearing a two-strap dust mask with because it says dust mist on the label, and you're thinking, okay, it looks like this. But what I recommend and what I tell people, and I can't urge it strongly enough, is you go by what the manufacturer says. If the manufacturer says it's good for pesticides, it's good for pesticides. If they say it's good for sweeping and it's good for cutting wood or something like that, that's not pesticides. And so like the Moldex, can't think of the number for it right now, but there's a Moldex product. If you go and look at the package insert, it will tell you the recommended uses for that product. And you will not find pesticides on any of these lists. You might find one that says good for nuisance odors, and that's when a voluntary use can, if someone is bothered by the smell, but it doesn't address it on the pesticide label, you can use a nuisance use. Does that make sense? So,
and the question was though, but that doesn't trigger the requirement for the training.
Using a dust mask,
unless it has the seal. Well, for pesticides, you're not going to be using that for that.
Correct.
but just
But
just using dust masks for any purpose.
So we have a leaf pulling crew.
Okay,
Mhm.
Leaf pulling crew asked to have dust masks.
okay.
Does that require the training that's on the CDs that you just showed?
No.
Okay.
But they need to know not to how to properly store them still. I mean, that's kind of just a general PPE, kind of care for PPE, that you don't want to wear it when, it's falling apart or it's filthy and you're sharing them. You can, pass a lot of disease that way, so that's kind of more on the common sense line. The hearing that Tim mentioned before, the level that kicks in the hearing conservation program is 85 decibels for an 8-hour time-weighted average. So if people are using noisy equipment for an 8-hour day and their level is over 85 decibels, that kicks in the hearing conservation program. And that requires annual noise monitoring to make sure that the person is not experiencing hearing loss. So if you're working with really noisy equipment for a shorter period of time, that will skew your whole 8-hour day. I did noise monitoring on an individual cutting down an oak tree. And it took them probably an hour. They were over for the entire day. Even if he would have sat in a soundproof booth the rest of the day, he would have been over for that 1 hour maximum time, put him over for the whole day. So, and you have 6 months to do that, get them into the hearing conservation program. So with ag, it's kind of, they're gone by that time. But if you've got full-time employees driving tractors are noisy. You can have a consultant come out. Leaf blowing, that's another one that's really loud. So different types of equipment, you can have them come out and monitor that equipment to make sure, okay, if they're doing this for 2 hours, then they can't be doing it. They have to do something quieter. So you can make it work to where you don't have to do that.
The best thing to do, I think, is to have a consultant out, either from us or from your workers' comp carrier, and just get a baseline average for all your equipment. Like I said, most likely it's going to be tractors, maybe some chainsaw use, but what they'll give you is the noise level with that piece of equipment, and then you can say, okay, we can only use the chainsaw for half day. Because what it is 85 decibels for 8 hours, approximately 90 decibels for 4, 95 for 2. So you get something that's over 100 decibels, it's a real short period of time that you can use that before it kicks in that needing to have that program. So if you can work around and get what your noise levels are and just change tasks for your employees, you can get away from even having to have that program, which is the annual testing and training and all that. So what they'll do is if you have a consultant out, they'll put a dosimeter on the employees, or they may use the handheld to just get the noise levels for you. So.
The other thing we're looking at when we come out on we do have a pesticide emphasis program in Oregon. We've had it in place since 1990. No, not 1990, 2000. And when we come out, we're just looking at pesticide-related issues. And one of besides all the things that I've just been talking about, one of the other areas is your pesticide storage area. And so what I've done is I've got copies of a pesticide storage checklist that you can use and go through to see if you're in good shape, and the rules are on the back. There are some rules that apply if you've got restricted use materials, and then some are just general. And we also have just a few copies, and I only brought one today, and it's on farm chemical storage. This has got a nuts and bolts guide to building a pesticide storage facility, and it's a really good publication. So we've got that. And we've got this available at our library, and like I said, I can leave one with Chris, and so they're no longer available for purchase. So Chris can, I'll leave one with Chris, and so he can share. Also we have in Oregon we have the Pesticide Stewardship Program with DEQ, and so I brought some information on dealing with pesticide spills and other pesticide resources as well. Let's see, and then one more thing for lime sulfur, we have a hazard alert. If you're using lime sulfur and you mix it with any phosphate containing products, we had a near fatality down in Medford back in the latter part of the 1990s. And so this is a hazard letter on how to avoid such a similar situation from taking place. And so I think that is, on the eye protection that Tim mentioned before, for eye protection for danger, poison, the EPA, as far as the label goes, says you have to use either safety glasses and a face shield, chemical splash goggles, or a full face respirator. Those are the 3 options for when it requires eye protection. So that's for danger, poison. For caution label products, you go by the label. If it doesn't say safety glasses, you don't need to wear those. Warning, it's usually safety glasses. And when it says safety glasses, they need to have the temple protection and the side shields. It's not just the wraparound glasses they have to be designed for the chemicals, for safety glasses, if you're using those. So just the wraparound ones will not work, because like he's wearing over there, he's got them in his hand. It doesn't have, they're not designed for chemical use. So again, look at what the manufacturer says. If the manufacturer says good for chemical splashes, you're good to go. So look at anything you buy as far as personal protective equipment, it's going to give you some specific information inside the packaging. And so keep a hold of that and make sure, double check. Yes?
2 questions.
Uh-huh.
So is there a Salem office where we can go and pick up materials that you're talking about here, and where is that?
Yes, there is. Our field office is going to be on my card right here.
Okay.
It's out towards the Home Depot off the Industrial Cherry. We're right out there. And then our central office is downtown on Winter. And we have a library down there, so all this stuff is there. Plus, you can check out videos.
On the Winter, at
Yeah.
the Winter Street
Yeah.
address?
And a lot of this stuff also, you can go online and they'll mail it to you. So,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when he said the web, for the pesticide emphasis program, we print out every year, or not print out, we put online our annual report on what our findings are. So you can see what areas we've been addressing, what are the most frequently cited violations, so you can kind of gauge, what we've been seeing. We also do a little write-up on our park cases, the ones where people have been adversely affected by pesticides. What were the contributing factors there, so you can then avoid those types of situations.
So my other question is, for those of us who have vineyard managers that
Mhm.
we've hired, and they have relationships with the farm labor contractors, is there a place where we can clearly see what we as the owner need to do? What our responsibilities are versus what our vineyard manager or the farm labor contracting agency? Because it gets very fuzzy sometimes knowing.
Yes.
mm,
So when I've worked with the vineyard manager, when I've done inspections on a vineyard, and they have a vineyard owner, and then they have a vineyard management company, and then the vineyard management company might hire a contractor,
Mhm.
It's making sure that we look at, okay, who's doing the spraying? If it's the vineyard management company, they're the ones that have to communicate that information to the contractor. But you, as a vineyard owner, you can have the central posting area at the vineyard, and you can maintain that there. So that makes it easier for the contractor to know, okay, on this site, this is where it's at. You can, depending on your, who's going to be providing decontamination supplies, if it's that takes coordinating. You can provide that there, or make arrangements for one of the other parties to do that, because it does get fuzzier as it gets spread out. But I understand the need for a management company to help alleviate some of, all the red tape and finding out all the information. But as the owner, having a knowledge of, okay, this is what's required, so when you're out there, you can be looking to see, okay, we're spraying this, that kicks in these rules, let's make sure that these elements are in place. But having a consultant come out and walk you through that, I highly recommend
Yeah.
that.
So let me get this. So you hire a company basically to manage your vineyard, correct?
Correct.
So all you're doing is paperwork. Well, okay. Then yeah, what we would look at would be, of course, their training. If we come out and do an inspection, The only time you would be found maybe liable or is if you're aware of a hazardous situation as the owner and did not take care of it. You're pretty much almost like a general contractor is what you are. And so the only time OSHA addresses something with somebody like that is if you're knowledgeable, if you're aware of the situation and don't take any action. So,
Or you provided a malfunctioning tractor.
So, I mean, what would be helpful is
Mhm.
if there's a way to clearly know what the responsibilities are, then to go back to our contract with our management company to be sure all of those things are addressed.
Okay.
And, which I think they are, but, you know, I'll go look again. And then the other thing would be to know, if there is a mistake. If our manager doesn't do something correctly, can we still be held liable or not? And what kind of insurance coverage is available even then
Well, and
if
that's-
ultimately there's
Yeah.
a problem?
Yeah, and that's what we really look at too is who covers the workers' comp coverage for your employees.
Right,
The company does. You don't, right?
correct.
So yeah, we would, if we came out to do an inspection, it'd be with them, not with you. Unless we start our investigation and then found out, again, like there was a bad tractor and you provided it and you knew it was bad, then, and what you really need to be careful for there is third-party lawsuits. Because the way workers' comp is you can't sue your employer. That's the way worker comp law is. But when an accident happens, quite often you sue everybody else. And so that's where you have to be careful there.